Well, an Iraq war veteran has been identified as the gunman who drove into a church in the US state of Michigan and opened fire, killing 4 people. Authorities say hundreds were inside when the building was also set alight by the suspect. Joining me now is Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Kosha, thanks for joining me. This is not the first attack on a place of worship in the US in recent months. What's behind the rise in violence, particularly against Christians, do you think?
It is not. The last couple, there was a school shooting in Minnesota. There was a Christian school in Tennessee where that happened. That's even worse, not to put a multiplier on it, but because there was children involved. And, the president himself came out and called this an attack against Christianity. I know there's an argument on the other side, given the emerging profile of the shooter, that he was a war veteran, an ex-Marine, et cetera. So it's not always clear cut in that way, but it does seem like in general, violence is on the rise. You can draw a straight line through all of those incidents, the Charlie Kirk assassination, and now these churches. And if anything, certainly there doesn't seem to be enough of a strong pushback against attacks on Christianity and churches and places of worship the way there might have been if it had been another religion or another situation. And I think that is a narrative that we're going to see continuing to rise and see pushback from the government on that, certainly from Trump and Vance. But this is certainly something, any violence is very bad, but when it is a place of worship, it just rises to a whole other level. And I think people are very, stunned as these incidents continue to rise.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Donald Trump's response. He's posted on social media, this appears to be yet another targeted attack on Christians in the US. This epidemic of violence in the country must end immediately. But this is the thing, Kosha. We're seeing this time and time again. You mentioned Charlie Kirk. A lot of these incidences are clearly politically motivated. We talk a lot about how much words matter, and there's been a lot of inflammatory language, particularly from the Democrats, particularly from the left. But what's the solution here?
Tough. I think, there's sort of a pyramid of attack that's happening, and the solution, I think, has to reflect that pyramid. So at the bottom of it, and you've heard reports of this, of really getting to the bottom of who's funding things. I'm not suggesting this particular attack was on the back of some sort of organized funding, but in general, there is a lot of funding, allegedly, that is taking place around a lot of these agitators from different aspects, whether it's going after a place of worship or it's going after individuals like Charlie Kirk or what have you. How much of that is the result of some sort of organized effort? That's one layer. The next layer is certainly the media and the rhetoric, and not just the media amplifies it, but also elected officials. You had the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, just came out and said the other day, 2 days ago, that Stephen Miller, one of the chief policy advisors for the Trump administration, for example, is a fascist. The government of California sort of put that out there. And he got a lot of blowback for that because it's not even 3 weeks since what happened with Charlie Kirk. So there's sort of this tone or this call to try and tone down that rhetoric from elected officials and the media, certainly in their role in that. So I think it's those two things. You've got to name and shame people for doing this and calling everybody a fascist, everybody Hitler, et cetera. There are consequences to that because words do matter, as you say. And then also sort of the funding and organized crime that takes place as a result of that funding. And then the last thing, of course, is just going after the actual perpetrators and agitators in the public. And that's where President Trump designating Antifa as a domestic organization and unleashing the full weight of the government to try and tamp it down is something we didn't see it in 2020 after the BLM riots, but I think you're seeing that and ratchet it up a little bit right now. And I think those 2 to 3 vectors, if we go after all of that, then you might try to see some semblance of a solution, but it is not going to be easy. And I hate to say it, it might get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. Now, I've got to ask you about this. New York Mayor Eric Adams has surprisingly dropped out of the city's mayoral race. Have a listen.
It has been my honor to be your mayor, and I'm proud to say that we took that victory 4 years ago and turned it into action. And yet, despite all we've achieved, I cannot continue my re-election campaign.
Kosha, there's hope that this move may now put pressure on front-runner socialist Zoran Mamdani. The guy's got a resume longer than my arm. But what's promoted this dropout, do you think?
He was certainly under a lot of pressure because this race is Mamdani's to lose. As much as we cover it, as outrageous it is that somebody like him who has no business being in politics and running for the mayor of the most iconic city on earth all that being said, he really is still the front runner for this, just given the structural reality of the electorate in New York City. And when you cannibalize the opposition, so you had former Governor Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams both running, they were sort of cannibalizing the vote, and that just mathematically really was a big, big advantage for Mamdani. Him dropping out, of course, removes that cannibalization risk and gives a fighting chance to Andrew Cuomo. And I'm sure all of that pressure was certainly there. He was under a lot of pressure to drop out for that reason, to give Cuomo a fighting chance. On top of that, he certainly was in the crosshairs of different investigations, and he was the culprit of bribery charges and things like that, which were dropped or lessened, but his hands certainly weren't clean. So I think all those things were brought to bear to get rid of him so that Cuomo had the chance.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Kosha Gada, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.